Hello, and thank you for joining us for the newest episode of Discuss with Russ. I'm Russell Rivera, founder and president of Voice Wealth Management. This is our 24th episode, and my guest today is Tom Kowalski of Rep. Our topic today is cyber-securing your digital and financial assets. For those of you tuning in for the first time, the Discuss with Russ series has focused on helping you get through the crisis and start thinking about all the other aspects of life that can have large effects on your financial situation. We want to help you take advantage of opportunities, manage risks, and avoid pitfalls so you are most likely to succeed. Voice Wealth Management primarily works with entrepreneurs, young professionals, and their families to help them get the most out of their money. While I'm a chartered financial analyst and certified financial planner, many also see me as their personal CFO and financial therapist, recognizing the psychological power of money in addition to the using short-term and long-term planning to help you get the most out of every dollar you earn and use. Now on to our guest, Tom Kowalski. Tom is the founder and CEO of Rep, a global cybersecurity and reputation advisory firm specializing in managing risk. Tom protects clients from cybersecurity threats, and his clients range from individuals to small and medium-sized businesses. Rep has one goal: to instill cyber intelligence in each individual. Tom's career has spanned more than 20 years in public relations, media risk, and cybersecurity. He synthesizes real-world and virtual activities into a common language so clients understand potential risks and their relevancy. His strategies safeguard data and public personas. He holds a certificate in cybersecurity strategy from Georgetown University and is actively involved in the New York and national chapters of ISACA and the FAIR Institute, industry organizations which help determine best practices regarding risk in the IT and cybersecurity spaces. And with that, Tom, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us today.
Russ, first, I'd like to thank you for having me today. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, yeah, great. Me too. This is our first attempt to tackle this space, and it's kind of like it feels almost delayed, right? In the sense of we've spent so much time over the last year sitting at home doing things almost exclusively in the computer realm, but for decades now we've heard warnings about cybersecurity for both individuals and businesses. So let's take a step back. What does cybersecurity actually mean in practice?
Yeah, that's a great question, Russ. And, you touched upon the transition to the more virtual work environment for a lot of companies. And that's opened up many risk doors because a lot of companies weren't prepared for that. The working home, they lacked a policy, basically, but they also lacked the infrastructure to protect their data. And, to answer your question, cybersecurity is really protecting the digital infrastructure through people, processes, and technology. So it's securing every component that processes data, right? In today's connected world, this affects every single individual and business.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, even going back to last spring, we saw some, and we still see obviously varying policies. So for example, New York City public schools for a time shut down Zoom because they were concerned about cybersecurity for whatever reason. As obviously most of us use Zoom as our video interface now, they needed to do some things around encryption, I guess, because there were concerns about their connections through China, for example. Tell us a little bit more about what professionals are concerned about with some of these video sharing platforms. And I guess what, as a user, as an individual, I should be worried about in selecting a platform, maybe choosing to change a platform. What are the things I should be looking for that I, as a layperson, can understand?
Yeah, you raise a very good, important point. And I talk about this all the time, and I'm going to pick on TikTok because that's, the most prominent social media platform or video platform that we're familiar with that was thrust into the spotlight this past year. Because you did mention China, and it's related to a company that's based in China. And I think here's the thing that you touched upon when you began this podcast, and that's the psychology hat that you wear to support your clients. And I've embraced a psychological approach in my business because cybersecurity is not just a business issue. It's not just a technical issue. but it's a psychology issue. And when you connect the two dots, which is based on human emotions, and then the end means some ill-gotten gained means, which might be mostly financial, but it could be, extortion or malicious behavior, especially targeted towards children. When you connect those two dots, all the roads in between kind of make sense, because right now, if you look at it, all those roads, it's a lot of noise. And so to answer your question about, video platforms, TikTok in particular, the challenge is that people don't understand the geopolitical nature of why they need to be concerned and look at the bigger picture, right? So they look at perhaps President Trump, who wasn't a fan of TikTok, but they look at that and, okay, well, this is a president who generally wasn't liked, but so he disliked that platform. So therefore, it must be okay to use, because I don't believe in his politics. But people don't look at the bigger picture. And what I mean by that is, all right, well, we have a company that's based in Beijing, right? Now, companies that are based in China are mandated by the government to hand over that data. That doesn't mean that TikTok is doing that, but it could mean, if they were required to, that they can. Okay, well, why should I care? Because that behavior, that data coming from that platform could be analyzed and used against you. They could analyze, I mean, I put an absolute there. They could analyze the time that you're performing these activities, what's going on in the background. So there's all sorts of issues that could happen. Once people understand that bigger picture, I think, the risk analysis before you even use that platform or download it and understand what they're doing with that data and what could happen makes a lot more sense.
And I think some people, you mentioned some of the reasons why people may not have thought about TikTok in that way, but again, to some extent, it's been on people's minds. We've had the last couple of years with the GDPR regulation, and people are certainly becoming more aware of the debates of how their data is used. If you're on the Google platform, maybe versus using an Apple-based platform. So why don't we talk a little bit more about that from, understanding that for a user perspective, right, in terms of their security of their data that way.
Sure. So if I could sort of reiterate your question here, you're trying to understand the privacy difference between.
Well, I'm not trying to jump ahead. I just know that people are thinking about, right, like they're understanding, right, that Google tracks a lot of their data and that's how they get ads. And we're talking about, right, and how Facebook looks at a lot of things that they read and then targets things at them. And people are obviously concerned about it, not only for themselves and the online personas, like you said, they have, but also just in terms of what does that mean for their security in terms of other stuff. And obviously people are worried about more macro implications politically, but that's not the topic of our conversation.
Right.
But in terms of, how people maybe can do things, are concerned about not giving data away to Google or to Facebook or to Apple. And obviously they all have different policies and all of that. So I think that's something I think some people are also worried about.
Absolutely. And, look, this stuff is very complex. And that's why it takes folks like myself to sort of translate that complex language into something that is easily understood by all individuals. And look, you mentioned GDPR. We have CCPA, which is a Consumer Protection Act in California. We have Virginia, who's just passed a law, the most comprehensive, and it's mirrored off of CCPA. Another Consumer Data Protection Act, and we have the SHIELD Act in New York. So we're beginning to see sort of a hodgepodge of statewide regulations, but we don't have sort of a national federal data protection policy in the US yet, like the European Union does with GDPR. And that really, it's up to companies to sort of change that behavior, but it's really up to the individual, because if you leave it up to some of these companies, look, that's not really their job. They should be advocating for privacy, but they don't always, right? Facebook is getting on board with that. I've been seeing them advertise for that. But in the past, and nothing against Facebook, but they haven't really been present like Apple has. Apple's been consistent since day one with their privacy policies. but it's up to the individual before, bringing it back to TikTok. I'm not picking on TikTok here, but it's any application that you download really, is reading those privacy policies. And look, they are complex, right? I get it. They're written by lawyers for lawyers. But here are the three things that people need to look for, right? And this is important. The country of origin that the company is based, because looking at that geopolitical viewpoint is important. But then what they're doing with your data once you download and how they're processing it. And so what I mean by that is, are they sharing it with any third parties, and what kind of data? So for example, if you have a recipe app on your phone, so think about it this way. If you download it and it says it needs access to your photos and your contacts. Okay, I can understand photos if you're sharing recipe photos through the app. But if you're not, what does it need access to your photos for? And certainly your contacts. So, thinking about that and taking a common sense approach before you even download it, and understanding why you're using it and what data is being shared outside of that application, how they're securing your data are all important things even before you download it. And that's right in the privacy policy.
And yeah, I mean, like you said, those things are for lawyers, by lawyers, and people are like, I just want to use the thing.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, what, like, right. I mean, we'd all be completely, in many ways, we'd all be completely paralyzed by trying to understand this stuff and wouldn't actually get to use any of it, much less get anything done if we were trying to actually understand what all this was about. Obviously, we could talk about whether or not there are policies that should put this into plain language, but then again, why are the lawyers involved? Because it's that policy that matters, right?
Well, we're moving towards that, and CCPA is a good example of that. Now, what CCPA means is California Consumer Protection Act, and what's required by law under that act is that companies outline their privacy policy in a very coherent and articulate way so everybody can understand. And that's, that particular portion of the privacy policy, or a lot of companies are embracing that framework to outline their privacy policy, because you can literally scroll through. And I know in an instant gratification and communication world, before you download that application, you get excited to use it, it's easier to scroll through and get that information that I just outlined, and to identify what they're doing, and then perform your own risk analysis, right? Do I want to use this? Am I okay with that, or am I not okay? And that's really how you need to approach a lot of these applications and even websites.
And listen, I even know for myself, being in my industry, we have a two-page, or any application that we have, any new client application or a customer agreement has a two-page privacy policy, but it's not legalese. It has to put it into plain language. It's like, what are the data we can take? What can we use it for? And it tries to put it into plain language.
That's right.
Then the question is whether or not people read it.
Right.
So, I know we got a little bit off where we're planning on going this here, and, in dealing with individuals and, that might be watching this. So many people are trying to make sure they have secure email. I know Google is supposedly secure email, also have antivirus things on their computers. So why might that not be enough? And what other steps should people be taking and using to make sure they don't get hacked and accidentally, instead of just giving data or even knowingly giving data by, saying, yes, I authorize use of photos and contacts, but accidentally get hacked and really give access to bank accounts and those sorts of things that can really do damage?
Russ, that's an excellent question. And I'm very happy that you raised it, because here's the bottom line. It's not a safe practice to think I have enough, right? And, this counters the statement that, well, wait a minute, you're the expert in what you do. And here's what I tell people, right? You're the expert in you do, but whatever that may be, let me be the expert in cybersecurity, because I think people embrace, that's sort of a false sense of hope that sets up, right? So I have a free subscription to whatever antivirus that might be, right? I'm good, I'm protected, but you're really not. And, again, taking that psychological approach to get people understand, but it's also applying cybersecurity to every layer of the business and personal activities, right? Whether you're an individual, whether you're a business. Think of cybersecurity as an insurance protection package, right? So, Hurricane Sandy came through New York several years ago, and this was common that a lot of folks here in New York, they don't have flood insurance because they're not in flood zones, but the hurricane caused a flood that damaged a lot of property, and a lot of people didn't have flood insurance. Now, think of cybersecurity as the same way. Not, it's not an end all for be all, and so all protections aren't the same, especially with antivirus that may be free on your computer. A great example, I have a new client, and this is a recent, these are recent data points from my company. And the client's a high-powered real estate broker. And she almost had a breach. And I woke up one morning and I saw alerts going off for her system. What happened was there was ransomware and malware sitting dormant on her computer. And all of a sudden it was being activated and moved around. And this is how it happens. I talk about this all the time. Uber is once a startup. And if you're a startup or a small business and you get a breach and those types of malicious files are on your computer, you don't know that, right? But then when you're a multi-billion-dollar company, that's when an adversary may press go. And that's exactly what was happening here. And through a quick forensic investigation, we found that that malware was sitting on her computer since 2015. Now, why do I raise this in relation to antivirus? Because she had one of those free antivirus protections and it didn't catch it. And so my endpoint protection package caught it. And I say endpoint, you're probably like, what's endpoint protection? What's the difference between antivirus, right? Well, we live in a connected world where we have Alexas, we have kid devices that are, toys that are connected to the internet, like gaming, nanny cams, but we also have our mobile phones and then our PCs, which hasn't changed. And so when we talk about endpoint protection, that means we're protecting the entire network, which means all of those devices.
We'll come back to it. And I had a really interesting question off of that, but we'll come back to it. In logging, you mentioned all these devices and to some extent all these virtual service providers. I think one of the things you and I have talked about in the past is, we talk about frustrations and things people need to do, right? Whether it's privacy policies, but even the most simple thing has to do with changing passwords. I remember the old 1994 movie Hackers, right? Like that's the first semi-pop culture reference to computer hacking that I could think of. And at least it was the first one devoted to it, where the most common password used was God, right? A 3-letter word, or, essentially that was a password. And obviously everybody who knows anything knows that we've moved way past that since then. But now we've gotten to a point where I think end users, right, the uninitiated, and certainly you're more initiated than I am, are really frustrated by all the processes that are in place, right? Like you have, it's like, I would like to have a password that I can easily know. Or if somebody's telling me I have to have 50 different passwords for 50 different programs, how do I keep track of it all? And now I just learned my password. Now you tell me I have to change it. And now instead of being 8 characters, it's got to be 16, so how do people get over this frustration? What can they do? And what does it mean about, the world going forward where everything's so crazy in terms of just trying to protect all your access to your virtual service providers?
Yep, good. And that's a great question. And this is a common question that I get. And the first thing I would have to say is, a lot of people have cyber excusitis, right? And they make all sorts of excuses why they don't need to, pay attention to this stuff, or maybe they have fear inside. But, the reality is that these things are increasing in nature. And when it comes to, the complex passwords, you hear me say, complex passwords, how am I supposed to remember over 100, maybe thousands in some cases, passwords? Look, I have a lot of personal passwords and I have a lot of business passwords. I can't possibly remember that. And, you know, if I have somebody that says, oh, I've memorized all my passwords, I kind of look at them funny because I'm like, how do you remember 10 to 15 upper and lower number letters, characters? I mean, that's just impossible. I'm sure it's possible because there's a lot of people out there that have photographic memories, but most can't. And you know, a password manager is the answer to this, right? And think of it this way. I love analogies because it sort of paints a picture. And I think in the world of cybersecurity, this stuff isn't tangible. You can't hold it in your hand. You can't touch it. You can't feel it. So we have to incite human emotions again. So it's going back to that psychology approach, because cyber breaches are caused, over 95% of them, as a result of human behavior, but they're caused by the 5 human emotions. And so in order to get people to understand this, you have to get into their head, right? You have to create value for them. And a password manager is like this, right? So you put your money in the vault in a bank, and different dollar bills have serial numbers on them in the vault, and they're protected. Well, those serial numbers are your access codes to authenticate yourself in your applications, right? So you certainly don't want them all over the place. That's what a password manager is. It's essentially a vault for your logins, for your credit card information, for your license, because who can remember all that? And especially your social security number, a lot of people forget that too. It's on a piece of paper. God forbid you're carrying that around with you and your wallet gets stolen. Now what? Leave it at home, leave it in your safe. But if you can't remember that specific number, a password manager is a great place to store it. Now you're probably wondering, okay, well, what if the password manager gets breached? That is possible. That's happened before, but we have high bits of encryption, the service, and it's stored in your own vault. It's not stored on a server. None of that information is stored on a server. So it's very difficult to breach that. And it's a good method to use because why? I have a client that came to me, it was an identity breach. When we started doing investigation, we found that over 42 instances online, she had the same password. So it wasn't a surprise to me that she had a breach because from her Gmail to her Uber, so on and so forth, it was the same password, right? And at first, she wasn't keen on the password manager because look, it's an extra step in the way that could cause delay. Look, we're a society that appreciates convenience over security, right? But this password manager, it doesn't add any delays, and it integrates into your browser and your phone, and you're able to access your information. And now she sent me a text message a couple of weeks ago. She loves her password manager. So it just goes to show you that it's easily adoptable, but it also protects you and hedges against, you know, the risks out there. If your password is stolen or dumped on the dark web, it's a great option, and it mitigates that the problem of remembering your password, right?
Uh, Well, yeah, absolutely. Or writing it down. I mean, obviously, you know, we're hearing all sorts of major losses on things we can't really talk about, but from people who don't remember passwords that they created several years ago and have lost potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. Um, and somewhat related to that, um, are new technologies or will you know what will possibly new technologies such as blockchain technology resolve some of these issues as they become more widespread and over probably the next 15 years, let's just say, assuming that becomes a major that hooks on?
Absolutely. Blockchain technology works. Now think of it this way. If you're an olive oil producer over in Italy and you're shipping over, now I bring this up because olive oil has a tremendous amount of fraud in it. And I've done some consulting years ago in the industry, so I'm quite familiar with it. What happens is, you know, once that product leaves the farm and it's pure, it could come over to the shores of the US and get blended with hazelnut oil. right? Which it doesn't really have a taste. And then they might put coloring in it to make it look green, because real olive oil looks green, right? So think of data. What happens to that farm if they don't track that product from the farm to the table of the customer? It's very hard. Well, blockchain puts a code on a piece of data that's able to track it, and it's not able to be manipulated, right? And we're going to be seeing a lot of difference, especially with online currencies, because what we see with Bitcoin, you raised a good point with forgetting a password. There was not too long ago, it was huge in the news. I'm sure you probably saw it, where an individual lost millions of dollars because he forgot his password and he was locked out. That's significant.
Yeah, and I want to move away from talking about that specifically. You'll never hear me utter that word on this show for a million reasons. But that's the kind of thing, is like, how can that technology and theoretically, how will that change this landscape? And that's something certainly I'm starting to think about a little bit more as I learn a little bit more. But we're talking about financial repercussions. What are potential costs to individuals who are victims of a breach, whether it's on an external system or on their own systems, right? Okay, I'm sure every single person watching this show has gotten a letter saying from someone, from some company, email or hard mail, saying, hey, you may have been victim of a breach. Our servers were X, and here's why, and here's what you can do about it, and here's what we can offer you. But in terms of, person protecting themselves, what costs do they have to worry about if they're not taking care of themselves in a real way?
So that's an excellent question. And I talk about the financial repercussions all the time. And I think one of the first times we spoke, I said, look at cybersecurity just as an iceberg floating in the water. We only see a portion of it sticking out, but the bottom half is where the good portion of it is. Same with a cyber breach, an identity breach, and in terms of costs, right? So if we have a breach, we think of, okay, well, it's going to cost me X amount of dollars, or I might get fined, or so on and so forth. I might have to pay somebody to remediate. I might have to pay somebody to upgrade my systems. That's the top of the iceberg. The bottom half that people don't think about are the long-term repercussions, and that is the reputational factor. You can't really put a cost on reputation. I mean, that's priceless, especially for small business owners where, over 60% do not have a cyber system in place. But if you experience a breach and you're a small business owner and you don't have the reputational coin in the bank to withhold or withstand a breach, you will go out of business within 6 months. Those are facts. So when you look at these things, the ability to retain employees, retain customers, attract new business, those are all the bottom half of the iceberg, and those are huge financial costs. So I say this to say it's very nuanced, and there are several factors that go into a breach and the financial costs. I mean, look, we could have a small breach with a data leak, right? But we could also have an identity breach that involves medical data, right? That's sold on the black market for over $250 a record. But then we could have a company who experienced a breach and involves ransomware that costs millions of dollars. And then there's lawsuits. And then there's what I was mentioning before, the reputational factor and ability to retain and attract new customers. So
yeah, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, previously working, for a prior employer in the financial services industry, right? The thing they always talked about, and not necessarily in terms of a breach, but just in terms of general business practice, is it takes a lifetime to build a reputation. It takes a second to destroy it, right? So that kind of thinking from the business perspective is obviously why a lot of this is important.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yep. And then the one point I didn't touch upon is the regulatory fines that you might experience for a data breach. Who wants the government breathing down their back for 7 years after you have a data breach? And they will, right? that's probably a bigger pain in the neck than having the fine itself. But, those things are changing and they're coming. So, it's time to get rid of the cyber excusitis and really pay attention to this stuff, because you don't want to experience any of that. You really don't.
So I guess the next question is, somebody is breached, right? Well, let's talk about an individual. Obviously there are all different types of breaches, and maybe you could focus on just a couple. Somebody is breached. What should they do?
First, come talk to me. No, seriously. I speak to many business owners, both new and existing, from solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs to businesses with 500 employees. And, many of these businesses, I'm working with a friend and a business partner on a workshop for business owners, right? And this is coming soon. We haven't announced it yet, but she specialized, her former company was in marketing, but she found that a lot of business owners didn't have a plan, right? And we connected and we started talking, and I said, well, interesting. A lot of business owners don't have cybersecurity plan. And we were just talking about the financial repercussions, and it's those two important things, because if you're going on a road trip, how do you know where you're going without the map? Those two things are incredibly important, right? And they go.
Are you reading my marketing spiels? Is that what's going on?
Listen, there's a lot of synergies here. But the point of the matter is instead of skipping, and look, marketing is incredibly important as a new business owner. Doing everything is incredibly important. I get it. But having those strong structural components, which are the solid foundation of your business, is incredibly important. And you have to have that plan, especially when an incident occurs, right? So all businesses are mandated within a certain amount of time to release information to the public, to their stakeholders, and it depends on what industry you support. If you're in a regulated environment, that's usually right away. But then, you want to be more transparent, but then it's solving the problem, right? Do you have the right people in your company to spearhead that and to help the cybersecurity experts, remediate that situation and to get your business back up and running? And so, I say all this to say is that having a proper plan that's based in risk is incredibly important, that focuses on three components: the risk assessment and constantly evolving, proper management of the program, and then involves human cybersecurity awareness training, because at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, with 95% of breaches are caused by humans, and then making sure that's constantly evolved. And then there's the incident response planning portion of it. So in case, in the event that things go left, you want to make sure that plan is ready to go, because you don't want to be scrambling to solve those problems. So here's my advice, right? It costs nothing to have a consultation. I want to be clear with that. It costs nothing to ask questions and have a consultation. And I think in people's minds, they look at cybersecurity, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, they get lost in a Star Wars galaxy, and I have to bring them down and translate this for them. And a part of that, especially for small business owners, is they have a budget, right? And a very small one. But here's the thing. You have to start with nothing. And it goes back to what we were talking before with that free antivirus. Well, that's better than nothing, right? But if you're a business owner, that doesn't work. You need a little bit something better. And if you have $200, great, and that's your budget, great. I got something for you. But I know, Russ, that $200 client will have more needs and will grow and will scale. And I'm here to grow and scale with them and support them, because I know that that client is going to grow into, a huge project for me. But my purpose is to protect their business. And it's got to start somewhere. And it starts with that consultation. Just ask the questions, because I know everybody has questions. And once you start talking about this stuff, they really, they open up. So I think that's incredibly important.
And what about individuals, right? I mean, in the sense, we've talked a lot about businesses the last several minutes.
Yep.
We can talk about not clicking on links from emails you don't recognize. Like I actually had this conversation with my wife the other day. It's like, she gets something. She's like, I'm not doing that. I'm like, she's like, who doesn't know how to do that the other day? And I only half jokingly said to my wife, everybody that we talk to has an IQ over 120. And I mean, the idea being, there are still people who will see that, and you catch the right headline, you catch the right thing, and they don't know what to look for. Maybe they haven't gone through the cybersecurity awareness training at their workplace or something like that, and then they open themselves up personally without recognizing they've done it. So, aside from the most obvious of don't click on emails, the links from emails from people you don't understand or know, what other immediate things can an individual do? And if they do get breached or sense that they have some sort of identity issue, what should they do?
Yep. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because we've mentioned businesses here, and I don't think we've really focused on the individual level. Is you made a very important point, and you said, all right, well, if an executive has a job or an individual, doesn't matter who it is, at a company, and they're on a company issued device, most times they're protected by whatever the company gives them. But when they go home and they're pulling up their email on their personal devices, that we saw during the pandemic, because that's what was happening. And that's why we've seen the breaches increase. And so what I do is I assess not only personal activities, family, but the devices. So I go into a home, I look at what they're using. They have Alexa, they may have children, they may have a baby and a Nest Cam. They may have a Nest thermometer. They may have a Wi-Fi printer. Of course, everybody has Wi-Fi these days. Is that secure? So I'm looking at every single thing, including mobile phones, and the obvious is PCs, but I'm more interested in IoT devices. What's an IoT device? Internet of Things, right? So Alexas and all that. Those are things that people plug and play into that open up those risk doors, and that they don't think or know that they have to secure. And that's incredibly important, because all sorts of privacy issues occur and breach. And so that's how I support individuals. So we have mom or dad that may work at a corporation, but then they come home and their personal devices aren't protected, but they're logging on, they're doing work activities, or they may be emailing themselves, depending on their IT policies, and pulling up that company information on their personal devices. But what if we have, a client situation, as I had a couple of weeks ago, where we had malware and spyware on the computer, and you didn't have my security program on your computer, or an adequate one at best that would pick that up? What do you think is going to happen? Now that exposes the enterprise. So that's how I support individuals. And then, there's some overlap there with consultants, right? So you may work at a corporation, but then you may have a side gig. And that's incredibly important to protect your side gig, protect your business, but protect your family as well, right? We could talk about this all day, and it's like a spider web, right?
Sure.
I'm talking about the surfacey stuff here, but then there's the ugly stuff of, cyberbullying and, defamation suits and cloning of social media profiles. I mean, that stuff gets real ugly, and I have experience in that too. I mean, those are stories for another day, but those are sort of the things that we don't really talk about in cybersecurity that are a result of poor security practices. And so really coming in and educating clients on those risks, to your point, and allowing them to understand what that phishing link is and being aware of that. But it's beyond just knowing what a phishing link is. It's how you move about in your daily activities, how you conduct yourself in both the physical world and the virtual world, because those two things intersect with each other. That answers your question.
Yeah, no, and don't get me started on deep fakes, but we'll slow down there. So is there any final words that you have on things that we haven't quite covered?
No, I would just go back to the cyber excusitis and really, look, it doesn't cost anything to have a conversation with a cyber expert, and that's the beginning, right? And that as a financial planner, is you gotta people have to start somewhere, and just as the financial industry can be very intimidating, so is cybersecurity. I get that, and that's what I'm here for. I'm help clients understand what it is, how to protect themselves, and that's really examining their life, right? I'm here to help people and help them grow and prosper, just as you are.
Yeah.
And it starts with that conversation. That's where it starts.
So how can people contact you?
Appreciate you asking that. Folks can contact me several ways. I would implore everybody to follow me on social media, on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook at Secure My Rep. And then there's my website, securemyrep.com. And there's a contact form to reach out, and I'm happy to offer a complimentary consultation to begin those conversations with everybody.
Great. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Russ, I appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Once again, I want to thank Tom Kowalski for joining us today on Discuss with Russ. For those of you looking to reach out to me, you can reach out at Russell, RUSSELL .Rivera, RIVERA @voicewealth.com, or just call at 646-630-0980. Again, that's 646-630-0980. And if you're interested in other or past episodes of Discuss with Russ, you can view those at voicewealth.com/blog, though we are going to be redoing the website in a couple of months and giving it its own page on our voicewealth.com website, as well as the Voice Wealth Management YouTube channel for all of our videos, not just the Discuss with Russ series. So our next episode will come out next month. We don't quite have a topic yet, but it will be a good one for episode 25. So I'm looking forward to that one. And Tom, once again, thanks for joining us. And thank you all for watching and listening to Discuss with Russ. And we'll see you next time.